How did you carry on, and why did you carry on doing properties?
Right, well, I'd finished it, and I'd already realised that I was learning. I was better at the end of those 3 years than I was at the beginning. And then I thought, right, I quite fancy moving because I'm still young and I've still got energy. I'm still 22 now. And I thought, right, well, if I sell this for 12,250, to buy something comparable, I'm just swapping like for like. So I wanted to upgrade my postcode just a little bit. So I went about 7 miles away from there and I bought something. But then I realised when you're in a better postcode, you don't get the same for your money. So I bought another distressed property. This one was even worse than the first one. And I started all over again. Now, this time it took me 4 years. But this one, I didn't quite double the money. I bought that one for 14,500 and I sold that for about 26, 4 years later. And then I did the same again and the same again. And without realising it, I'd actually started, I suppose if you want to call it a career, I'd started a career in property refurbishment. I didn't even know what I was doing. But it just came about purely by accident.
So when did you make the leap or take the decision to actually say, right, I'm going to do this full time now?
About 8 years ago. I'd given 36 years to the civil service and I was a spent force. I'd done every job that they could assign to me. I didn't want to start going around robbing and doing it all over again. I thought if I don't go now, I'm not going to be young enough or have the energy or enough time left even to be able to do maybe what I want to achieve. So there were a lot of changes going on in the civil service at the time, a lot of changes. And the opportunity to go came and I jumped. I thought, I'll go now or I don't go at all.
And with your portfolio, up till now, you've sort of bought projects, you've lived in them, you've refurbished them, and then you've sold them.
Yes.
When did you start thinking, actually, I might try and hold on to some of these properties?
I've always held some. I've never flipped everything. I've got the first property that I ever bought on retirement that I bought for £45,000. And it's probably worth about 135 now, 8 years later. So I've kept those which cash flow well. And it's funny because I've noticed that those that cash flow well don't have necessarily quite as much money in them to flip. Those that cash flow less well usually have a lot of capital. It's just the way they've dropped. It's just the way that the value has turned out at the end of the. So I will cash in those with large returns in a lump sum to me, but those that cash flow very well and have still got room for growth, I leave those as my base income, I suppose.
And tell us about your plan. When you sort of sat down and thought, okay, so I'm now moving into property, what was your plan?
Did you think I got one?
I think you did.
Yeah, I did.
I've got a funny feeling you did, yeah.
Yeah, I did. But again, it was just more, I didn't think it was a plan, but I did give it a name eventually because people used to constantly ask me, well, how's this going to work for you? The killer was when they said, what's your long-term strategy? I said, look at how old I am. I don't really have time for a long-term strategy. So the plan was that I would start with a base of maybe 3 or 4 properties, grow the portfolio to 12, 15, 16, start cashing them in at that point, and actually reduce my lending. And my ultimate goal is start at the bottom, come out to the sides where I grow the portfolio, take it back in, and because of that shape, I've always nicknamed it my diamond strategy. By the end of it, I just want a very few properties, but totally unencumbered. So that has a knock-on effect for me about how I leave my properties, about how I leave my properties behind to my family. I don't leave debt. Most properties are owned on interest-only mortgages. When I do training, I ask people to actually spreadsheet and keep a dated graph of when their interest-only mortgages are likely to end, because you've got to pay that back. And most people have used all the rental as income to live on. They get to the end of the term and they can't pay anything back, and they've got to sell them back then anyway. You're hammered for tax because you're selling too many at once. You have a drop in income. if you've been sensible and you've sold them along the way and you've reduced your lending, you end up with a handful of unencumbered properties